Hey, come see us on tour. We'll be in Tempe, Arizona, Los Angeles, Columbus, Ohio, Dayton, Ohio, Cincinnati, Lexington, Burbank, California, and Honolulu. Go to jimmydore.com for a link for those tickets. Don't go anywhere else. So one of the people who endorse your books is Susan Humphreys. She says you will be pleasantly surprised by the fact that so many delightful foods that were once villainized are now known to be necessary for strength. What are some of those foods that used to be villainized that you now could say are necessary for strength?
Well, I'll tell you two surprising ones. The first one that anyone in natural health would say is saturated fat. Been villainized for half a century, for sure. Initially precipitated primarily by Ansel Keys, a really phenomenal researcher in the 50s. And he unfortunately published some studies like the 7 Heart studies, or I forget what the name of this study was, about in the 50s though. And it really catalyzed this whole adoption of the low-fat approach of eliminating saturated fats. And you know what they replaced the saturated fats with, don't you?
Sugar?
No, seed oils.
Oh.
It's interesting because seed oils do in fact lower the villain, which is cholesterol. No question seed oils do. They do. But they lower it and they cause damage to the very molecules, the cholesterol molecules, that actually causes the plaque that contributes to heart disease and stroke. Yeah, okay. So seed oils are the culprit.
Okay, so I didn't. What wasn't it the sugar industry that made us? Didn't they take some of his work and then highlight it and make us afraid of saturated fat? And that's
how they absolutely did. That is correct. Yes, and he unfortunately, I'm not sure if it's outright fraud, but he manipulated the studies. He removed a lot of he had the 27, I forget the name of it. It's been a while since I reviewed the work, but 7 country studies, I think it was. And there was like usually 22, and he cherry picked the data.
So if he chose 7 countries to show you that saturated fat made you more likely to have heart disease. But if he would have picked 7 other countries, it would have had the exact opposite. So
exactly.
He was cherry. So yeah, we've covered it. We've covered that here. Midwestern Doctor wrote about that in a blog.
But you want, what's the other food?
So
this is the surprise one.
So saturated fat is good. What's the other one?
And Dr. Humphreys doesn't know this because I didn't share it with her. But it's something literally. It's sugar. Sugar is actually a health food, and it is literally. You weren't expecting this, I know.
No.
If you know how to use it wisely, it can restore your energy, and I'll tell you why. Okay, because sugar. And you have to use it carefully, but it is the ultimate fuel for your body. What is the fuel for mitochondria? There's only 2 fuels your body runs on. It could run on proteins, but that's a very inefficient way to generate energy, and it's very inefficient. So the primary fuels are fat and sugar. And when you go on a high-fat diet, which I previously promoted because I was confused, I didn't understand it. I was caught up in the mania of the low-fat diet, the low-carb diet, that carbs were this pernicious evil. And carbs are nothing more than the innocent firemen at the scene seeking to put out the fire, and they're blamed for the fire. That's the view of even many natural medical doctors that think carbs are dangerous. They're not. That you need carbs. Now, sugar is sort of an extreme, but what happens? Let me just continue along this journey. There's so much to share. And thank you so much for giving me an opportunity to go in deep into this, because when you lose this energy, one of the primary functions, and Jimmy, virtually no one understands this. There are literally probably 2 handfuls of physicians, maybe even less, in the planet that get this. Because Dr. Pete didn't have a lot of followers. He didn't. But what happens is that when you have a lot of mitochondrial poisons, your energy level goes down. And Dr. Pete didn't understand this. One of the most important functions of cellular energy is that there's cells inside your colon that line the colon. They're called colonocytes. And they keep a nice little shield there. And then the goblet cells make the mucin, which lines the borders of the goblet cells. And when you don't have enough cellular energy, those colonocytes start to die. And what's the result of it? Well, these colonocytes, they love fat. These are the cells that need fat. And there's very specific fat that they like, which is something called a short chain fatty acid. And that's literally, there's like 3 molecules, essentially butyrate or butyric acid, propionate, and acetate. And these are byproducts of the good bacteria. Beneficial bacteria, or what I like to call in the book, oxygen intolerant. And we'd say they're oxygen intolerant because they get exposed to a little bit of oxygen, they die. Why is this important? Because those colonocytes, they start to die. Because of this beta oxidation using the fuel from the beneficial bacteria, when they start to die, the oxygen starts to seep back in because they can't repair it and keep it out. So the good beneficial bacteria start to die too, and they get replaced by disease-causing pathogenic bacteria. Those are oxygen-tolerant bacteria, and both of these bacteria produce the fourth and the primary reason why people are dying, that mitochondrial poisoning, was something called endotoxin. I don't know if you've heard of it before, but it's a molecule that's embedded in the cell walls of both of these types of bacteria. And the endotoxin in the beneficial bacteria is actually benign. It doesn't hurt you. But the endotoxin in the pathogenic disease-causing bacteria is virulent, and it destroys the mitochondria. So when you lose the mitochondria, you get into this vicious cycle I call the black hole of death. And unless you escape from that cycle, Jimmy, there's no way out. You're going to die prematurely. It's almost impossible to be healthy.
And
it's
so
like the black hole.
What should people do to escape that cycle?
There's another factor I want to mention here.
Okay.
It gets back to the sugar. But by the way, one of my next books is going to be called The Sugar Cure. The Sugar Cure. And it ties right into this, okay?
Now, when you say sugar, you don't mean high fructose corn syrup, right?
No. I mean real regular sugar. The high fructose corn syrup is bad because fructose by itself is not a good molecule for humans. It's great for prokaryotes, the bacteria in the soil, but you don't want to eat it as humans. So with the best sugar it has two names. You've heard of glucose before, right?
Yes.
So glucose is also called dextrose. And in fact, if you've ever been in the hospital, I'm sure you have, they run an IV, and in the IV, it says like D5W or D10W, and that D is dextrose or glucose. Okay. And if you have table sugar is a disaccharide, means there's two sugar molecules, and one of them is glucose and the other is fructose. And you can have both. At least table sugar is okay, but it's not as good as dextrose. So here's the point that you need to understand, but it's why sugar can be very beneficial. Because as you get sicker and sicker, the healthy vegetables, the healthy carbs, the complex carbs that we're all taught from childhood are so healthy for you. Vegetables, fiber is good for you. You need 40 grams of fiber. Well, I'll tell you, Jimmy, when those bacteria start to shift and you have a preponderance of oxygen-tolerant pathogenic bacteria in your gut, which almost everyone does. It is the exceptional, rare individual, way less than 1 in 100, probably less than 1 in 1,000 people isn't loaded with this stuff. When you have that preponderance, that fiber that would be normally fuel for the good bacteria actually fuels the bad bacteria, and they make the virulent, toxic, or more poisonous endotoxin. So it makes you worse. So complex carbohydrates, if you have this preponderance of bad bacteria, make you worse. So eating the fibers and ostensibly healthy vegetables, absolutely counterintuitive, will make you worse until you shift that bacteria.
How do you find out if you have the good bacteria or the bad bacteria?
Well, there are tests now. Now, interesting, most of those good beneficial bacteria, we didn't even know they existed until 20 years ago, because they require, they require an environment to live that is called anaerobic, or means no oxygen. So it becomes very difficult for them to grow. So the only way they found these out, they were discovered only 20 years ago. And they did DNA sequencing in a lab to find out what these were. And look at these new bacteria. We didn't even know we're there. Now we know they're there. And they're actually, we have the ability to find them. And we're learning new stuff all the time. And there's probably a dozen or maybe even more of these good bacteria. And there's only one, it's called Akkermansia, that's even commercially made, because you need hundreds of millions of dollars to create these plants to make them, because they're so rigorous environmental controls that you have to implement before you can grow them and harvest them.
So what can someone do? What should you do? What should we be eating?
Well, the number one rule is two things, and you're doing it. Stay away from seed oils. That's the number one thing. Stay away from seed oils, and then stay away from all processed foods. That's the bane of health, because in almost every processed food will be seed oils, and probably some of the high fructose corn syrup. So this is where.
So that includes anything that includes anything basically that's deep fried, correct?
Yeah, I mean, well, not necessarily, because you could theoretically, I still wouldn't do it. You could deep fry in coconut oil, and that would be okay because there would be there's a tiny bit of PUFAs in there, but a saturated fat when you heat it's not going to. It doesn't turn into these oxalams, so it's not dangerous. So you could have that, or you could. Another way is you can coat it with coconut oil and put it in the oven and bake it, which is very similar textures to frying.
Okay, so stay away from seed oils. Except for coconut oil is good. That's and then you say
yes,
coconut oil, butter, ghee, and tallow.
Tallow.
Yeah, so there's a place down the street from my house that cooks their fries in tallow.
That would be fine.
Yeah, so that's okay.
And you know what? McDonald's used to do that before this ostensibly philanthropic, I think it was a billionaire.
It was a billionaire, yep. He got him to switch to vegetable oil because he thought it was healthier.
Yeah.
And
he was wrong. And he died of heart disease.
So I also go to another place, they cook their fries in duck fat. Would that be okay?
Yeah, no.
Why not?
It depends. Because most ducks are commercially raised, and ducks and chickens are another one. The reason why the beef fat is fine is because it's a ruminant animal. And a ruminant means it has multiple compartments in their stomach, and these other compartments have bacteria in there, which they do a process called biohydrogenation. They saturate those PUFAs, so they don't store high amounts of PUFAs because the bacteria in these chambers changes it to a saturated fat. So they have very low levels of PUFA. And so birds are not ruminant animals. That would be cows. That would be buffalo, elk, deer, goats would do it. But otherwise you want to stay away from it. So chicken is not the health food that it was believed to be. And it can be, but commercially they give them grains, which is another food. In fact, my very first book, 20 years ago, Jimmy, actually 21 years ago, it's called The No Grain Diet. And that was a New York Times bestseller.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so what about, when I eat eggs, eggs are good, right?
They could be better. Most of them because they're from chickens. And remember, I said that they feed these chicken these grains that are high in the PUFAs. So commercially raised chicken, even organic, free range,
what about
400% more LA than chickens that are raised with low PUFA foods.
What about
four times as much?
What about pasture raised?
Yeah, it's the same thing.
Really?
Pasture raised because they're in the pasture, but there's no way the chickens can get enough calories from grass. They have to eat bugs, and that would be great if they can, but most places don't have enough bugs. So they feed them other foods, and the foods they feed them are grains. And the grains are typically not the low linoleic acid grain. Like a really low one, almost zero, is white rice. That's one of the best carbohydrates you can eat is white rice.
Really?
White rice.
Is that why Japanese people seem to be healthy?
I think so. I always wondered that. I was perpetually curious about that because they totally violated the rule that we had that low carb, you eat low carb, you're going to die prematurely. Yet they were literally not ignoring, but they were proving that to be not true. But white rice is one of the best foods, and it's one of the least expensive. I mean, if you buy it in bulk, like at Walmart or something, you can get really healthy white rice for $1 a pound, and that's not cooked. That's just $1 a pound. I mean, you buy it in 20-pound bags.
But now brown rice has arsenic in it, correct?
No, it's not the arsenic. It has something worse than arsenic, which is the fiber. Because it's the fiber, remember, that serves as fuel for the bad bacteria. The white rice is so good because there's none of that fiber. And this is the other reason why the dextrose or the glucose is so good, because the fiber foods, your body can't digest them. They travel all the way down the intestine, small intestine, then into the large intestine, the colon, and that's where the bugs eat them. But the sugar, the white sugar dextrose that you can buy in the store for $5 a pound, and it's absorbed in your upper small intestine. It never reaches the colon, and it gets into your body and it provides the perfect fuel for your mitochondria. The only problem, though, is you can't take too much. You almost have to do it like that IV. So some sick people who can't almost eat any food, these horrible food allergies, and they're dying. I've seen so many people are terminal, and they've had this because they're the end stages of mitochondrial poisoning. And then the only food they can eat that really gets them through this is sugar. I basically have them put like a half a pound to a pound of sugar, dextrose, in a half a gallon of water, and they sip it all day long. You don't want to drink the whole thing at once because then you have massive hormone disruptions of insulin.
So this is really goes against everything that we've heard, right? So
absolutely, which is what you love that. That's your you embrace all that stuff. I know you do. So happy to talk to you.
So you're saying get rid of the seed oils. But if I have the good bacteria, I don't have the bad. Say I have the good bacteria, then it's good to eat fiber, right?
Yeah. I actually, in the book, you'll see, if you look at it, in chapter 10, I divide carbohydrates, which is really the crux. And most of this is helping people understand the value of carbohydrates, into 3 categories: green, yellow, and red. And for most people, the complex carbs are red. They should not eat them. They're red for everyone, but you only want to do a red carbohydrate when you're healthy. So some of the other, there's yellow ones, which should be some of the starches, like potatoes, white potatoes and sweet potatoes. Would be good.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And so then those are next up after rice. And things like maple syrup are actually pretty healthy, but you just don't want to take lots of them all at once. You want to, and then fruit. Fruit is probably one of the best. Whole fruit. But people, Jimmy, there are so many people are so damaged that when they eat fruit, they get sick. Because there's fiber in the fruit, and the fiber travels down to the intestine, stimulates the production, the growth of these bad bacteria, the pathogenic bacteria, oxygen tolerant, and then they make endotoxin and they get worse.
So tell me how I can find out if I'm healthy or unhealthy, if I have the good bacteria, the bad bacteria in my colon, and if I can eat complex carbs or not.
Well, you can do it. The simplest and easiest and least expensive way is to just test yourself with foods. So if you're reacting to these carbohydrates, these complex, ostensibly healthy vegetables, good chance that you have a preponderance of pathogenic disease-causing bacteria in your colon.
What kind of reaction?
Bloating, gas, distress, fatigue, tiredness, mental fogginess, all of those things.
Okay.
They all result in a decrease in cellular energy. I mean, all result from. So, but if you want to be more objective and use scientific tools like lab tests, there's some expensive tests. They're called microbiome assays, and they typically run about $500 to $1,000, and you can actually identify the bugs. The problem is they're an antiquated model, and they're looking at the pathogenic bacteria, and most of the ones are identifying are the bad bugs. And the bad bugs are only there, Jimmy. They're only there because the good bugs die. Nature abhors a vacuum. The good bugs die, someone else is going to come in. Okay. And those are the bad guys.
And how do you restore the good bacteria?
The unbelievably perceptive question. Magnificent question. You're great. That is the best question. So the way you should do it is you limit the mitochondrial poisons, because there are, as I mentioned earlier, alluded to, there are probiotics you can take. Like Akkermansia would be the only one now. There's a lot of complexities to it. But to take the best bacteria like a probiotic when you have lots of oxygen in your stomach or colon is not going to work. Because as soon as those guys get there, if they get there, because there's no delivery system yet that allows them to get there well without dying prematurely in the small intestine, they'll die. So the first step is to stop the mitochondrial poisons, which would be seed oils, number 1, then plastic exposure, which is a danger because it stimulates the estrogen receptors. And there's so much confusion about hormone replacement therapy, even bioidentical hormone replacement therapy. And estrogen is the pernicious villain here. It's the one that's taking so many people out, especially women. Women are typically dying of breast cancer because of the estrogen exposure. And it's not direct from estrogens. It's the plastics that are pervasive in the environment because they produce
plastics. You saying with the
plastics? P with the plastics, yes, because they produce something called EDC. That's short for endocrine disrupting chemicals.
And so
EDCs.
That means
that stimulates the estrogen receptor.
You mean like drinking out of a plastic water bottle, that kind of plastic?
Yes, or having plastic food wrap over your meat.
No.
Or yes.
What?
Very dangerous.
What are you supposed to wrap your food with?
That's the challenge, Jimmy. There's been a perversion of this whole science, a suppression of this knowledge. There are many reputable scientists written books and papers, and there's a legion of them that understand this. But they're discredited, and anytime they go out to try to spread this research or start a company, they're just put out of business because they're in competition with these plastic manufacturers. So I'm in the process. One of the things I'm going to do is make biocompatible alternatives to plastics. And one of them is we're going to make these dextrose. So the most table sugar is dextrose and fructose, as I mentioned earlier. So we're going to remove the fructose from there, just make pure dextrose, and we'll have fructose left over. And that fructose we can use as an ingredient to make plastic alternatives that actually serve as fertilizer, good, healthy fertilizer when you put them in a landfill. They cause the good bacteria to grow. So it's the best of both worlds. No damaging plastics, no endocrine disrupting chemicals, and you feed the soil. It's the best.
That seems like a task that no one could meet to get.
No, Jimmy, I assure you, I will do it. I'm in the process of doing it now.
I mean, I'm not saying you wouldn't be able to invent a plastic alternative, but right now...
No, they exist. They exist. The problem is marketing them and letting the public know and being aware. But I have a very large platform. My platform is going to increase exponentially when this book is launched. Okay. There's so many other things I've been launching with the book. We could talk for hours on this.
I know we could.
You'll see.
So I just real quick, you heard that they had these studies that tried to prove coconut oil to be bad, right?
Oh yes, that was vilification from the edible oil industry for sure.
So
the EOI, the edible oil industry. Yeah, they've been doing it for years.
Yeah. So they tried to make people afraid.
Yeah, of course, that's a classic strategy. You know that well. You know it better than most people.
Well, I'm still going to eat extra virgin olive oil. I hope that.
Yeah, you can do that. Just keep it low. Don't go more than a tablespoon a day. Really. It's you're probably okay at tablespoons, especially since you have low linoleic acid. But ideally, and I can send you the studies on it if you're interested, but it's problematic.
Okay.
Oh, I never finished the test. There are tests. I told you those expensive tests.
Yeah.
I'm in the process now of creating a microbiome assay that costs, get this, $50, Jimmy. It's not $500. It's not $1,000. It's $50 that will identify not only which bacteria you have there, but how much you have of them. And I'm hoping to have that available later this year.
So, okay, I look forward to that, actually, very much. Hey, come see us on tour. We'll be in Tempe, Arizona, Los Angeles, Columbus, Ohio, Dayton, Ohio, Cincinnati, Lexington, Burbank, California, and Honolulu. Go to jimmydore.com for a link for those tickets. Don't go anywhere else.